The Bangkok's wild, so it is. Sure, there's loads to do. Buddhist temples and that to see, if that's your thing. Just ask the driver of one of them tuk-tuks to take you, and he will right enough, no bother. Happy to help. As long as you don't mind spending 2.5 hours being fitted for an old cheap suit by his brother-in-law's second cousin twice removed, and a backstreet tailor's conveniently located about 10 miles in the opposite direction. Or else you could take a wander down the Kaisan market.
A Tiger in Eden is told from the point of view of one Billy Montgomery.
It is.
Can you tell us about him?
He is a loyalist hard man from Belfast who is early 20s, big, strong, muscular guy covered in scary tattoos who is hiding out in Thailand. He's on the run from the police. He's got up to some nasty stuff back home in Belfast and is kind of stuck in paradise. He's been there for a year at the beginning of the book and is enjoying himself there, but getting a little bit fed up with the hedonistic lifestyle. Kind of had enough of it, but doesn't know where to go next, doesn't know what direction to turn, can never go home again, doesn't really know. He's on a fake passport, he's even nervous to leave the country, so he's stuck in what might seem to be the best place to be stuck, but can actually be the worst place to be stuck.
In the context of your writing, where has this book come in?
Yes, it is my first novel, although it doesn't really feel like my first novel because I have written 5 novels previous to this. I recently turned 40 and I've been trying to get published for a long, long time, ever since, well, for 20 years basically. And the previous 5 novels were all flops in that they were either clearly at the end of writing them I realized that they were total rubbish, or else they were rejected by publishers. And I had almost given up hope of ever getting published, and I spent a few years working on this. It had various incarnations, this book. So this is the 6th book I'd attempted, and it was the 9th draft of the book that finally got sold. So that was me at my wit's end, and I was pretty much ready to say, well, that's it, I'm never going to be a published novelist. But at the 11th hour, someone believed in it.
Here you are.
Here I am. And this in itself, this version of the book is kind of strange for me to look at this because it is based on one single paragraph in the 8th draft. So the 8 previous drafts are all written in the 3rd person. They were all the same character, Billy Montgomery, but when he was in his 40s, looking back on his life, he was married, he had a child, and he was starting to reflect upon the things he'd done in earlier life, and it was starting to mess him up a little bit. But it seemed like a good idea, but it wasn't working. I couldn't make it work. And there was one paragraph in the 8th draft where someone had said to him, a colleague at his work said to him, "What did you do in your 20s, Billy?" And he said, "Oh, I bummed around Thailand." And when I sat down and looked at the 8th draft, I became curious about what he actually did in Thailand. And that one paragraph expanded into the entire 9th draft. So the story was in there all along, hiding. I just couldn't see it. It took me years to actually see where the story was. Sometimes you have to write thousands of words in order to work out what you're writing.
Yeah. You grew up in Belfast, which has obviously had an influence on your work. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, Belfast is an unusual place. Not a place I liked growing up in. My parents moved me out of the really nasty part of Belfast where they had lived their whole lives, Shankill Road in Belfast, where Billy is from. But my grandparents still lived there, so we'd go in every week to visit them. We moved, like a lot of families did, they moved out of the really nasty zones of Belfast into the sort of outlying areas, and that's where we lived. It wasn't pleasant. It was a pretty scary place to be, although you don't think that at the time because you're just used to it, you don't know anything else. And that's kind of like the way it is with Billy. He doesn't know anything else. He didn't know there was a world out there where people lived in a different way. And that's one of the problems I always had with Belfast, is that when you're there, it seems like the most important place in the world. The issues that revolve around terrorism and religion there seem so vital. But as soon as you step outside of it, it doesn't matter, and you meet people and they've never even heard of it. They don't know what you're talking about.
Is that sort of frustrating though, when they don't know anything about it?
No, it was quite liberating for me. And whenever I would travel in my early 20s, and I had grown up I was told as I grew up that I was Protestant and I was British because I lived in Northern Ireland. And so it came as quite a surprise to me whenever I travelled. People would hear my accent and say, "Oh, you're Irish." no one had ever called me Irish before. So that was quite strange for me. And initially, there was a bit of reluctance to say, I would always correct people and say, no, I'm from Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. So I actually have a British passport. So I'd make a bit of a deal out of it. Yeah. Not that I was very ardent, but it just seemed incorrect to say I was Irish. But as time went on, I realized that I was Irish, and I have an Irish passport now. I'm probably one of the few, if not only, Protestants from the Shankill Road who has an Irish passport. Came to Australia kind of on a whim. Didn't really know anything about the place. I had this very parochial vision of what Australia was as this vast, endless desert of beating sun. I imagined it to be a bit like the Sahara.
Riding kangaroos to school.
Well, I didn't even really think about the kangaroos. I just thought it was an endless dust bowl that I would never survive in it because I would spontaneously combust with the heat. I didn't imagine it as being all outback. I never really thought of it being a 21st century country that had cities. I knew there were cities, but I didn't really know anything about them. So I was reluctant to come here, and I came here under duress with a few friends just to check it out, and lo and behold, I instantly felt at home here. And I'd never really felt at home anywhere before, even in my home. I'd always felt like I needed to leave that place. I didn't really belong there. So it took a long time for me to find somewhere where I felt like I belonged, but this was it. So, and it's been very kind to me, Australia, so I'm happy to hold an Australian passport in addition to my Irish passport and my British passport.
Great.
Got quite a collection.
Yeah. Well, it makes things easier when you want to travel.
Or when terrorists get on the plane and say we're killing all the Australians, but it's not me.
Was it fun to write a book with so much sex violence and swearing?
Yes is the short answer. I wrote the book in very, very short bursts because it became like a performance act. The whole book is written in Billy's voice and in his vernacular, which is a very exaggerated version of my own accent and my own expressions. A lot of the expressions in there are expressions I used as a child but have never used since. He was a bit of an amalgam of people that I knew growing up and people that I had met since who weren't from Ireland but who seemed to be sort of tough guys who were a little bit lost in the world. So it was quite exciting to tap into that headspace every day where there's a lot of swearing and he deals with all his problems with his fists and doesn't really care if he loses fights. Not that he does, because he's so incredibly hard, but he kind of hopes to lose fights. There's a fight scene in this where 3 guys attack him and he's elated that they're actually fighting him and is hoping that they will be better fighters than they turn out to be. Because that's how he interacts with the world, is not through talking, it is through action. Yeah. But writing about sex and violence was a strange process. Being in that headspace, I couldn't stay in it for very long. I couldn't be him for very long. I would adopt his persona. I would write in his voice very short passages. Then I would walk around the room, put on his accent, perform what he said, notice where there was mistakes or phraseology that he wouldn't use, sit down laughing and edit it and change it. But it was constantly me jumping between being the nerdy writer sitting at his keyboard and puffing myself up and walking around the room like a hard man and saying the lines. So that was a very strange process, and probably why the book's short as well. I couldn't really sustain that for a huge 500-page book.
So are you anything like Billy?
Me like Billy?
I'll knock your fucking bollocks in. Fucking bastard!
I'm really nothing at all like Billy. Nothing like him at all.
What's the most exciting project you're working on at the moment besides your own fiction?
I am working on an issue of McSweeney's that is coming out later in the year that features 4 Indigenous Australian writers. I'm working on an additional McSweeney's project I can't talk about at the moment. And the big issue fiction edition, which comes out in August.
If you could be any fictional character, who would you be?
No, my first thought was the Hulk. Yeah, I like the Hulk. I like the idea of being totally calm and in control all the time and having to be that way, because I'm kind of like that. but when you do lose your temper, and you don't want to be around.
Yeah.
That's and I guess if I was being brutally honest, I'm probably a little bit like that.
Okay.
Can't believe I just compared
I
myself
won't
to the
piss
dog.
you off. I hope I don't piss you off.
Don't make me angry.
Okay.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
All right.